golden child brother stole my house with forged papers and got evicted. Now my parents beg me for help, and then I... Growing up in the quiet suburban town of Springfield was anything but peaceful for me. From as far back as I can remember, my parents made it painfully clear that my younger brother, Ryan, was their favorite. They didn't just love him. He was their golden child, the center of their universe. Meanwhile, I was just there, existing in the background. The day Ryan was born, everything changed. I was 7 years old, full of excitement about having a little sibling. But as soon as he arrived, the attention I used to get vanished. My parents doted on Ryan in ways I never experienced. If he so much as sneezed, the world stopped. And me? Well, unless I was in the way of catering to Ryan's needs, I might as well have been invisible. One memory sticks with me even now, my 10th birthday. I've been looking forward to it for weeks. My mom and I had picked out decorations, a cake, and party favors. Then, the morning of my birthday, Ryan came down with a cold. Just a mild sniffle, nothing serious. That was enough for my mom to cancel the whole thing. We can't risk Ryan feeling left out, she told me. As if celebrating my birthday would be some sort of betrayal. That's how it always was. Ryan's feelings came first, no matter how small the issue. And when I achieved something worth celebrating, it barely registered with my parents. I was the captain of the debate team in middle school, consistently made the honor roll, and even scored a partial scholarship on my SATs. But none of it mattered to them. Meanwhile, Ryan got a round of applause for mediocrity. I vividly remember one parent-teacher conference where my mom gushed over how proud she was that Ryan managed to get a C in math. A C. I was sitting right there with a report card full of A's, and they didn't even glance at it. By the time I turned 18, I'd had enough. I packed my bags and left Springfield, determined to carve out a life on my own terms. My plan was simple: get as far away from my parents' favoritism as possible, work hard, and build something meaningful. I landed in Renfield, a bustling city that felt like the fresh start I needed. College wasn't easy. I had to juggle multiple jobs to pay for tuition, but I pushed through and earned a degree in computer science. When I landed a job at a software company after graduation, I felt like I was finally on my way. It was at that job where I met Maggie, the love of my life. Maggie was everything my family wasn't: supportive, warm, and genuinely proud of me. She didn't just celebrate my successes, she encouraged me to dream bigger. We got married in 2015 and built a happy, quiet life together. A couple of years later, our son, James, was born. Becoming a father changed everything for me. I was determined to give James the kind of unconditional love and support I had longed for as a child. Life was good, better than I had ever imagined it could be. Back in Springfield, though, things were very different. Ryan never left home. He had tried community college but dropped out after one semester, claiming it was too stressful. My parents, of course, made excuses for him. He just needs more time to find himself, they'd say. At 28, Ryan was still living in the same bedroom he had as a teenager. He worked part-time at a video game store and spent the rest of his time gaming or streaming online. My parents covered everything for him: rent, utilities, car payments, even his game subscriptions. They called it supporting his dreams. One time, during a rare visit to Springfield, I made the mistake of suggesting that Ryan look for a full-time job. My mom burst into tears, sobbing that I was being too harsh on her sensitive little boy. It didn't matter that Ryan was a grown man, or that my parents were spending all their savings to keep his lifestyle afloat. Any suggestion that Ryan should take responsibility for himself was met with outrage. I kept my distance after that. Visits became fewer, phone calls became shorter, and I focused on my own family. But it was hard to ignore the bitterness I felt whenever I thought about how my parents continued to coddle Ryan while I had struggled to make something of myself. The final straw came when they insisted on hosting James's first birthday party. Maggie and I had planned to celebrate at home in Renfield, but my mom was adamant. It would mean so much to Ryan, she said. I knew it was a bad idea. I knew. But I caved, thinking maybe things would be different this time. Looking back, I should have trusted my instincts. The favoritism, the excuses, the blind devotion to Ryan. It wasn't going to change. Not then, not ever. And as I'd soon learn, that party was only the beginning of a much bigger betrayal. James's first birthday should have been a joyful occasion. Maggie and I had planned a small, intimate celebration at our home in Renfield. Balloons, streamers, and a cake that James could smash. It was going to be simple and fun. But my mom, Elaine, had other ideas. She insisted we hold the party at her house in Springfield. "You know how much it would mean to Ryan to be a part of this," she said during one of her many phone calls. "He's James's uncle. He deserves to feel included." I should have said no. Every instinct told me it was a bad idea, but I caved, thinking it would be easier to avoid an argument. Maggie wasn't thrilled, but she went along with it for my sake. On the day of the party, we arrived early to set up. Elaine hovered over us, making suggestions and supervising, while George stayed in the background, tinkering with something in the garage. Ryan, of course, was nowhere to be found. "Ryan's not a morning person," Mom said with a laugh when I asked where he was. By noon, the house was full of family and friends. James was having the time of his life, toddling around the backyard, giggling as he popped bubbles and played with his new toys. Maggie and I exchanged smiles, relieved that things were going smoothly. But then lunchtime rolled around, and everything went downhill. I was standing near the buffet table, piling pasta with marinara sauce onto my plate, when I turned and accidentally bumped into Ryan. A glob of sauce landed on his shirt, a limited edition gaming t-shirt, as he immediately pointed out. "Oh man, I'm sorry," I said, grabbing a napkin. "Let me take care of that. I'll pay for a new one or cover the cleaning costs." That should have been the end of it. But Ryan didn't see it that way. His face turned red, and he started yelling loud enough for everyone to hear. "You always ruin everything," he shouted. "You've been doing this to me my whole life." I stood there, stunned, as he launched into a tirade. He dredged up childhood incidents I'd barely remembered, like the time I tripped over his game console cord when I was 12, or when I supposedly ate the last piece of pizza at his birthday party years ago. The room went silent. Everyone stopped eating, their eyes darting between us. Before I could get a word in, Ryan stepped forward and slapped me across the face. It wasn't just the physical sting that hurt, it was the humiliation. The sound of his hand connecting with my cheek echoed through the room. For a moment, all I could do was stand there, stunned, as my face burned with heat. Then came the part that truly broke me. Instead of coming to my defense, my mom rushed to Ryan's side. "Ryan, are you okay?" she asked, her voice full of concern. "Did you hurt your hand?" I blinked, trying to process what I was hearing. She was worried about him? About his hand? Meanwhile, George stood with his arms crossed, shaking his head as if I was the one who had done something wrong. "Look at what you did to his shirt," Mom said, turning her glare on me. "You know how much he loves his gaming gear. He saved for weeks to buy that." I felt a mix of anger, disbelief, and sadness bubbling up inside me. Maggie, who had been holding James, looked just as shocked as I felt. James started crying, his little face scrunched up from the tension in the room. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned to my parents and asked, "Do you seriously approve of Ryan hitting me? At my own son's birthday party? You're older," Mom snapped. "You should have known better. Look at how upset you made him." That was it. The dam broke, and years of frustration and resentment poured out of me. I told them everything I'd kept bottled up for so long, that they had spent my entire life enabling Ryan, that they never held him accountable for anything, that their blatant favoritism had driven a wedge between us. "You missed my college graduation because Ryan had a gaming tournament," I said. "You barely helped with my wedding because you were so worried about Ryan feeling left out. And now this? You let him slap me in front of my wife and child, and you act like I'm the one in the wrong?" My dad finally spoke up, his voice filled with anger. "If you can't respect your brother, then maybe you should leave." I didn't need to be told twice. I walked over to Maggie, took James from her arms, and told her we were leaving. As we walked out, my mom started crying, not because of what Ryan had done, but because she thought I was being unfair to him. "Look how upset he is," she sobbed. "He didn't mean it." Later that day, the calls and messages began. My parents demanded that I apologize to Ryan. "He's locked himself in his room and won't come out," Mom said over the phone, as if that were somehow my fault. Family members started weighing in too. Some said I was being too dramatic and should have been more understanding because I was the older brother. Others told me I needed to apologize for spilling food on Ryan, as if that justified his behavior. I ignored them all. Instead, I blocked Ryan, my parents, and anyone else who sided with them. I wasn't going to let them guilt me into submission anymore. A few relatives who had witnessed the slap reached out to say they supported me. They admitted they'd always noticed the unfair way I was treated, but had stayed silent to avoid causing a scene. Their words were appreciated, but it was too little, too late. Maggie was my rock through all of this. She told me I had every right to cut them off, especially after the example they'd set for James. He needs to grow up knowing that it's never okay to hit someone, she said. Even if it's family. A month passed, and life without the drama of my parents and Ryan felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in years, I had peace. But as I'd soon discover, the peace wouldn't last. My family wasn't done with me yet, not by a long shot. 2 years passed after I cut ties with my family. Those years were some of the best of my life. Maggie and I had bought a bigger house in Renfield, and James, now 3, was thriving. We'd even welcomed our second child, a beautiful baby girl we named Grace. For once, life was calm. Then, one evening, my phone rang. The number wasn't familiar, but something told me to answer it. On the other end of the line, my mother, Elaine, was sobbing so hard that I could barely make out her words. "Tom, you have to help us," she choked out. Ryan is selling the house." It took a moment for her words to sink in. My parents' house? The one they'd lived in for as long as I could remember? How is that even possible? I asked, confused. Through her tears, she explained that Ryan had somehow transferred the house into his name. Without warning, he'd given them 2 weeks to move out. They had no money and nowhere to go. At first, I thought this was just another one of Ryan's stunts. But then my mother dropped the real bombshell. The house legally belonged to me. I almost dropped the phone. "What are you talking about?" Mom went on to explain that my grandfather, Henry, had left the house to me and his will 15 years ago. I was 20 at the time and had just started college. According to her, they hadn't told me about the inheritance because they didn't want to burden me. In reality, they decided to hold on to the house and live in it rent-free, intending to one day transfer it to Ryan when he was more stable. Stable? That word nearly made me laugh out loud. Ryan had been living in that house, completely supported by my parents, while I had worked 2 jobs to afford my own place. And all this time, they had let me believe the house was theirs. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, my voice cold. "Because we have nowhere else to go," she cried. "We're going to be homeless, Tom. Please, you have to do something." I was furious, but I kept my voice steady. How did Ryan even get the house in his name? Mom hesitated, then admitted that Ryan had convinced them to sign some paperwork a few months earlier. He told them it was to help him launch a gaming company. They didn't read the documents carefully and trusted him completely. While they were out of town on a short vacation, Ryan filed the paperwork to transfer ownership to himself. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So you let Ryan steal my house?" "We didn't know," she insisted. "We thought it was just a formality. He said he'd take care of us once his streaming career took off. We didn't think he'd—" "Of course you didn't," I interrupted. "You never thought Ryan would betray you because you've spent his whole life making excuses for him." She started sobbing again, and I hung up. I didn't have the energy to listen to more excuses. That night, I told Maggie everything. She was as shocked as I was, but she stayed calm. "You need to talk to a lawyer," she said. "Find out what your options are." The next day, I made an appointment with an attorney who confirmed what my mother had said. My grandfather's will had left the house to me. I had never signed any documents transferring ownership to Ryan, which meant the transfer was fraudulent. "It's clear he forged your signature," the attorney said. "We can take legal action to reverse the transfer." She also explained that we could press charges for forgery. While I was tempted, the idea of dragging this out in court felt exhausting. Still, I knew I couldn't let Ryan get away with it. Over the next few weeks, I started digging deeper. The more I learned, the angrier I became. Ryan hadn't just stumbled into this scheme. He'd been planning it for months. He had found my grandfather's will while rummaging through old family documents. After realizing the house legally belonged to me, he joined online forums about real estate fraud, using a fake name to ask for advice. He even hired a so-called consultant using money he borrowed from my parents, telling them it was for gaming equipment. When I confronted my lawyer with the evidence, she was confident we had a strong case. "We'll file a motion to void the transfer," she said. "Ryan doesn't have a leg to stand on." As we prepared to take legal action, my parents continued to call, begging me to let them stay in the house once it was back in my name. I avoided their calls, unable to stomach their pleas. One night, my father, George, finally got through to me. His voice was shaky but firm. "Tom, we made mistakes. We know that now," he said. "But we were only trying to do what was best for both of you. We didn't think Ryan would." He trailed off, struggling to find the words. I couldn't hide my anger. "You didn't think, period. You lied to me for 15 years. You let me work my ass off while you handed everything to Ryan on a silver platter. And now you expect me to clean up your mess?" Dad didn't try to argue. Instead, he just said, "We're sorry, Tom. We don't know what else to do." I hung up without saying another word. The situation felt surreal. My parents, who had always defended Ryan no matter what, were now the victims of his betrayal. The irony wasn't lost on me. As the legal battle began, I couldn't help but feel conflicted. Part of me wanted to help my parents. They were, after all, still my parents. But another part of me felt they deserved this. They had spent years enabling Ryan's behavior, and now they were reaping what they'd sown. The only thing I knew for certain was that I wasn't going to let Ryan get away with stealing what was rightfully mine. The legal process to reclaim the house wasn't quick, but it was thorough. My lawyer wasted no time filing the necessary paperwork to void the fraudulent transfer Ryan had orchestrated. I handed over every piece of evidence I had, including the messages from my mother admitting Ryan had forged documents and duped them into signing forms they didn't understand. It took nearly 3 months to untangle the mess. During that time, I learned more about the depths Ryan had gone to in order to steal the house. He'd created fake documents with shockingly professional quality, claiming he had my power of attorney. My lawyer said it was clear he'd either received advice from someone with legal knowledge or paid for a high-level forgery service. As we waited for the court's decision, I tried to focus on my family. Maggie was my rock, supporting me when I started doubting whether all this effort was worth it. Every time I wavered, she reminded me that this wasn't just about the house. It was about standing up for myself and ensuring Ryan faced the consequences of his actions. Finally, the court ruled in my favor. The transfer of ownership was voided, and the house was legally returned to my name. As part of the ruling, Ryan was ordered to vacate the property immediately. The day of the eviction was as chaotic as I expected. The police arrived to ensure everything went smoothly, but Ryan refused to cooperate. He locked himself in his room and screamed obscenities at anyone who came near the door. After hours of negotiation and multiple warnings, the officers finally threatened to break the door down. That was enough to get him to come out, but not without a dramatic display. "This is my house," Ryan yelled as he stomped down the hallway. "You're all out to ruin my life. You're just jealous of me." Jealous. The word almost made me laugh. Here was a grown man being dragged out of a house he tried to steal, and he still thought he was the victim. When he finally left, the house was in shambles. Garbage piled in corners, holes punched in walls, broken furniture scattered across rooms. It was a visual representation of the chaos Ryan had caused in my life. Later that evening, my parents showed up at my house uninvited. I didn't have to guess how they found me. One of my more meddlesome relatives must have given them my address. I opened the door to see my mother and father standing there, both visibly distraught. Mom's face was red and puffy from crying, and Dad looked like a shell of the man I'd grown up with. "Tom, please," Mom said, her voice trembling. "We have nowhere else to go." For a moment, I just stared at them, unsure whether to let them in or send them away. Eventually, I stepped aside and let them into the living room. Maggie was in the kitchen, feeding Grace, but I could tell she'd overheard. Her expression was a mix of sympathy and frustration. Once they sat down, Mom broke into sobs. "We're sorry," she said between gasps. "We never meant for any of this to happen. We thought we were doing the right thing. We just wanted to help Ryan." Dad chimed in, his voice quieter but steady. We made mistakes, Tom. We know that now. But we're out of options. We've spent everything we had on Ryan. His tuition, his gaming equipment, his car. We even took out loans to keep supporting him, thinking he'd eventually repay us. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process what they were saying. So you gave him everything, even when you knew he was taking advantage of you? Dad sighed heavily. We didn't see it that way at the time. We thought we were giving him a chance to succeed. But now we see what we've done. We've ruined him, and we've ruined ourselves. For the first time in my life, my father looked genuinely remorseful. Mom continued, Ryan convinced us the house transfer was just a formality so he could start a gaming company. He told us he'd take care of us once he was successful. We believed him because we wanted to believe him. He's our son. Your son? I snapped. What about me? What about the son you lied to for 15 years? The son you let struggle to make ends meet while you gave everything to Ryan? Neither of them had an answer to that. They stayed for nearly 2 hours, pleading with me to let them move into the house once it was cleaned up. I told them I'd think about it, but made no promises. After they left, Maggie and I sat down to discuss what to do. They're still your parents, Maggie said gently, and it sounds like they've finally realized how much damage they've done. I shook my head. They only care because they need something from me. If Ryan hadn't turned on them, they'd still be making excuses for him. I know, she said, but maybe this is their chance to change. Maybe it's your chance to set some boundaries and start fresh. After a long discussion, we agreed to let my parents move into the house under strict conditions. They had to pay rent, not market rate, but enough to remind them they were living in my house, not theirs. They also had to attend therapy sessions to address their toxic patterns. And most importantly, they were forbidden from allowing Ryan into the house under any circumstances. When I told them the terms, they agreed without hesitation. Desperation will do that to people. As for Ryan, he didn't take the eviction well. He sent me a barrage of texts, accusing me of ruining his life and turning our parents against him. You stole my house, one message read. You'll pay for this. I blocked his number but saved the messages in case I needed them for a restraining order. The last I heard, Ryan was couch surfing at his gaming friends' houses. Apparently, his big plan to move in with his online buddies fell apart when they realized he was broke and unstable. Some family members reached out, telling me I should help Ryan because he's still my brother. I ignored them. As far as I'm concerned, Ryan stopped being my brother the day he forged my signature and tried to steal what was mine. My parents, on the other hand, were slowly starting to make progress. Therapy was difficult for them, but they stuck with it. Mom admitted that she and Dad had always felt guilty about the financial struggles they faced when I was young, and they overcompensated by spoiling Ryan. Dad, in one of his rare emotional moments, admitted they had always relied on me to be the responsible one. They gave Ryan their attention because they thought he needed it more, believing I would be fine on my own. Their realizations didn't erase the pain they'd caused me, but it was a start. For the first time in years, I felt like we might have a chance to rebuild our relationship on my terms. 6 months have passed since I regained the house and set the terms for my parents living there. To say it's been a journey would be an understatement. Letting them back into my life wasn't an easy decision, but it felt like the right one, provided they stuck to the boundaries I set. So far, they've kept their word. They pay rent on time every month, albeit a modest amount since they're now on a fixed income. They attend therapy sessions regularly, which has been eye-opening for everyone involved. During these sessions, they've started to unpack years of favoritism and its impact on both Ryan and me. My mother, Elaine, admitted something that hit me harder than I expected. She said that when Ryan was born, she and my father were struggling financially in ways I never knew as a child. They couldn't give him the same comforts I had during my early years, and their guilt over that shaped how they treated him. At first, it was just buying him extra toys or giving him more attention, she said during one session. But it grew into something we couldn't control. We thought if we gave him enough love, support, and forgiveness, he'd turn into the person we wanted him to be. Dad added his own painful realization. We put all our energy into Ryan because we thought he needed it more. You were responsible and hardworking, and we took that for granted. We assumed you didn't need us in the same way. Hearing those words was bittersweet. On one hand, it validated everything I'd felt growing up, that I was overlooked because I wasn't seen as the one who needed their attention. On the other hand, it didn't erase the pain of those years. Their realizations also didn't change the fact that Ryan's behavior had gone unchecked for far too long, leaving devastation in its wake. Speaking of Ryan, he's had a rough time since the eviction. About 2 months ago, he sent me an email, a long, rambling apology that was equal parts self-pity and genuine remorse. He wrote about how losing the house and being cut off financially forced him to confront his choices. "I hit rock bottom," he wrote. "I had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. My gaming career isn't going anywhere, and my friends want nothing to do with me now that they know I'm broke. I've been seeing a therapist, and it's helped me realize how much I've messed up." Ryan went on to apologize for trying to steal the house, for forging my signature, and for slapping me at James's birthday party. He admitted that he had taken our parents' favoritism for granted and never truly appreciated how much they had sacrificed for him. "I'm sorry for everything, Tom," he wrote. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know I'm trying to be better. I've got a job now, nothing fancy, just warehouse work, and I'm sharing an apartment with some roommates. It's not much, but it's a start." Then came the request. Ryan asked if he could move back into the house with our parents, promising to pay rent this time and contribute to the household. I didn't respond directly. Instead, I forwarded the email to my lawyer, who advised me to keep my distance. "Given his history of deceit, it's best to avoid any direct contact," she said. I relayed the situation to my parents, and to their credit, they didn't push me to reconsider. "We love Ryan," Mom said, "but we know having him here would only cause more problems. We can't help him anymore. Not the way he wants us to." Hearing that was a relief. For the first time, I felt like my parents were starting to understand the importance of boundaries. Even with progress, though, things aren't perfect. Mom occasionally slips back into old habits, lamenting Ryan's struggles and wondering aloud if there's more she could do for him. Last week, she mentioned that he might lose his car because he can't keep up with the payments. I shut that down immediately. "He's an adult, Mom. He made his choices. If you want to help him, that's up to you, but not while you're living in my house." She nodded, looking ashamed. "You're right," she said quietly. As for my father, George has been surprisingly reflective. During one therapy session, he broke down, admitting he'd been in denial for years about Ryan's manipulative tendencies. "I kept telling myself he'd grow out of it," Dad said, tears in his eyes. "But he never did, because we never gave him a reason to. We made excuses for him, enabled him, and look where it got us. I don't blame you for being angry, Tom. We failed you both." That moment was a turning point for me. For the first time, I saw my father not as the stern, stoic figure I'd grown up with, but as a flawed, vulnerable man who was finally owning up to his mistakes. Maggie has been my anchor through it all. She keeps me grounded, reminding me that it's okay to feel conflicted. "You don't have to forgive them completely or forget what happened," she told me. "But you're doing the right thing by giving them a chance to make amends. Just don't lose sight of what's best for you and our family." James, now 4, occasionally asks about his grandparents. He's too young to understand the complexities of the situation, but he seems to enjoy the limited visits we've allowed so far. Maggie and I have started inviting Elaine and George to dinner once a month, giving them a chance to spend time with James and Grace. It's a delicate balance, keeping them close enough to rebuild trust but far enough to maintain the boundaries I've worked so hard to establish. As for me, I've learned a lot through all of this. I've learned that family isn't defined by blind loyalty or unconditional forgiveness. It's about mutual respect, accountability, and healthy boundaries. Ryan may never be a part of my life again, and that's a choice I've made for my own peace of mind. My parents are a work in progress, but they're trying, and for now, that's enough. The house is mine again, not just legally but emotionally. It no longer feels like a symbol of betrayal, but rather a testament to resilience and growth. And as I sit in the living room with Maggie, James, and Grace, I feel something I haven't felt in years: peace. It's not the kind of peace that comes from everything being perfect. It's the kind of peace that comes from knowing I've done my best to take control of my life, to set boundaries, and to protect my family from the chaos I grew up with. That's enough for me.